Welcome to the Psychology of Freemasonry with me, Chuck Dunning. The content of this video essay is largely taken from the first chapter of my first book, Contemplative Masonry, published in 2016. Before proceeding with an examination of the psychology of Freemasonry, we should first clarify what is meant by the word psychology. Psychology literally means the study or science of the psyche, and psyche is Greek for soul. Thus, we can rightly think of psychology as the study or science of the soul. In modern science, psychology includes the study of individual behavior, emotions, thinking, the nature and influence of the unconscious, psychosocial development, and psychotherapy, which is the healing of the psyche. Psychology therefore provides a way of understanding one's inner world and relationships, just as the other sciences provide understanding of the material world. If Freemasonry truly does have a psychology inherent to it, then each of these aspects should be addressed in some way. Is Freemasonry intentionally concerned with the psyches of its members? If it is, then there should be a coherent psychology communicated by our rituals and symbols. We can start answering that question by asking two further questions that should be familiar to every entered apprentice. Where were you first prepared to become a Mason? What did you come here to do? As every entered apprentice learns, the internal qualities of a person are what recommend one for Freemasonry. Where are those qualities, if not in the psyche? Also, consider the speculative use of our working tools. In particular, the gavel teaches us to remove all vices and superfluities from our minds and consciences, and thus our psyches. The perfect ashlar is provided as an emblem of oneself, made fitting for the celestial temple, which is a spiritual edifice. The point within the circle also alludes to the psyche in that it is said to represent the individual Freemason and the circumscription of one's passions and prejudices. Similarly, the cardinal virtues address not only proper behaviors with others, but are primarily concerned with teaching us about the patterns of thinking and attitudes that are the internal or psychological prerequisites for the external behaviors of right living. We could go on drawing examples from other degrees, but for now, it suffices to observe that all the social and moral virtues of the ideal Freemason can only manifest through a properly prepared instrument, and that instrument is one's psyche. The well-being and improvement of the psyche is therefore not only a matter of concern, it is the core issue within Freemasonry. With regard to Freemasonry, to say that it has a psychology is to say that it has within it, either implicit or explicit, answers to the following questions. What are the structure and dynamics of the psyche? In other words, what are the parts of the psyche and how do they work with each other? What are the necessary conditions of a healthy psyche? And what is the basic nature of psychological illness? What is required for an ailing psyche to heal? How does the psyche naturally grow and acquire the characteristics of adulthood? How can the psyche develop in desired ways? How does the interaction between psyches affect the individual psyche? And what are the ideal conditions of relationships between psyches? We began answering those questions by elucidating Freemasonry's view of the psyche's structure and dynamics. The ritual and lectures of Freemasonry directly address four different yet intertwining dimensions of the psyche. First, we note that it speaks of and actually involves the physical body and its behaviors. Second, It repeatedly touches on the emotions, passions, and desires. Third, it provides much instruction and stimulation for the intellect. And fourth, it reveres and nurtures the eternal spirit and free will. The dynamics of the psyche are the ways these four dimensions, physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual, interact with and affect each other. The teachings of Freemasonry make it clear there is a kind of hierarchy of functions within the psyche, an order in which one part can be largely ruled or controlled by those above it. Freemasonry acknowledges that the body can easily be ruled by one's passions and desires. Yet we are also taught that the intellect, by concentrating on the principles of moral and social virtue, has the necessary tools and much power to circumscribe desires and keep passions within due bounds, thus giving us the potential to conform our behavior more to reason than to emotion. The intellect, in turn, responds to the drive of free will and the callings of spirit. In short, spirit and will are at the top of the hierarchy, then the thinking mind, then our feelings and emotions, and finally, our body and its actions. This order parallels that of the hierarchy of needs proposed by the founder of humanistic psychology, Abraham Maslow. It is also closely related to the dynamics of transpersonal theories such as those of Michael Washburn and Ken Wilber. Within Freemasonry, there is also an implicit awareness of the unconscious dimensions of the psyche's structure and dynamics. Wherever Freemasonry speaks of mysteries, secrets, or darkness, it alludes to that which is hidden or unknown. That which is hidden or unknown about oneself is drawn forth in self-discovery from a region of the psyche that psychologists and therapists refer to as the unconscious mind, or simply the unconscious. We differentiate the concept of the subconscious from the concept of the unconscious by pointing out that the term subconscious implies an inferior position to the conscious mind, while unconscious denotes everything that is not only beneath the conscious, but also all that is outside of it, parallel to it, and even beyond it. Like the conscious mind, the unconscious spans the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions of being. We actually experience something emerging from the unconscious every time we dream, have a sudden intuitive insight or inspiration, or find ourselves feeling or behaving in some surprising way. As we shall see, the unconscious is actively engaged by Freemasonry, but if that connection is to be more fully comprehended, then the structure and dynamics of the unconscious must also be understood. The problem, of course, is that the unconscious is, so to speak, a place of darkness. We cannot directly observe it as we do the other dimensions of the psyche, but can only deduce its nature from the effects it has upon the conscious dimensions of the psyche. Thankfully, there are specialists in the psychology of the unconscious who have gone a long way in charting some of that undiscovered country. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, pioneering psychologists like Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, Otto Rank, and Robert Assagioli began to seriously study the unconscious and work with it in psychotherapy. Collectively, they and their followers are referred to as depth psychologists. These and other psychologists made great strides in exploring the relationship between the conscious and unconscious. They realized that when contemplating a symbol and speculating upon its meaning, one can receive insight and understanding that seem to come out of nowhere, or even a vague sense of deeper meaning that urges further contemplation. Such experiences are evidence that some rumination and reflection occurs on a level of mind not directly overseen and controlled in conscious awareness. The depth psychologists further discovered that symbols, whether visual images or characters of myth and legend, have the power to stimulate remarkably similar insights and developmental experiences in persons who are separated by time, place, and culture. In other words, symbols connect us with things that have not merely been programmed into us by our environments. As an example relevant to Masonic symbols, consider that the ancient Chinese sages, Confucius and Mencius, revered the square and compass as representative of virtue and wisdom, and did so more than 20 centuries prior to the formation of the Grand Lodge of England. What are those unconscious things that symbols tap into? Many psychologists refer to some of them as archetypes, literally principal forms, and they conclude that the unconscious must be something that transcends the individual consciousness and exists in a realm that holds these basic principles and powers of consciousness. Various analogies can be made to help explain what an archetype is and how it works. To some extent, an archetype is like a seed, which lies hidden and unknown beneath the surface of the soil. When conditions are right for it to sprout into the light, the potentials within that seed then become manifest in a plant typical of its species, yet unique in its particular being. In much the same way, an archetype lies hidden outside our conscious awareness, yet it can give rise to the flowering of certain patterns of thought and behavior in one human being that are essentially the same as would arise for another. We can also think of an archetype as being to our psyches what a gene is to the formation of our physicality. Just as each gene stimulates the development of certain physical traits and tendencies, each archetype stimulates the development of certain psychological traits and tendencies. The early depth psychologists were not the first persons to come upon such an idea. The great Renaissance philosopher Immanuel Kant was onto a similar concept with his idea of the categorical imperatives, which are something like mental instincts that automatically shape how we perceive existence. Hundreds of years before Kant, the Kabbalists were receiving similar insights about the Sephirot, or the fundamental cosmic principles inherent in creation. We can go all the way back to Plato, who held that everything is manifested from a level of being wherein reside the purest ideal forms of all that can possibly exist. Prior to Plato, we find a concept of archetypes expounded by Freemasonry's old friend Pythagoras. Pythagoras said that numbers are the foundations of everything. Each number was understood to have its own peculiar nature and potentials, and to be godlike in its power to manifest certain things in this world. Ironically, many centuries later, at about the same time depth psychology gave us a theory of psychological archetypes, Kurt Gödel, one of the most stunning mathematical minds in history, also concluded that numbers are not merely quantities derived from observing things in the physical world. Gödel, like Pythagoras, conceived of numbers as principles transcending the processes of sense perception and logic, and are therefore beyond complete comprehension. In effect, numbers are archetypes, and numerals are the symbols that represent them. More than one Masonic scholar has noted the importance of numeric symbolism in Freemasonry, and the ritual itself draws our attention to the art of arithmetic, quote, by which we learn the properties of numbers, end quote. Indeed, many versions of ritual openly declare that Freemasonry is identical with geometry. Our most revered working tools, the very emblems of our tradition itself, the square and compasses, are geometrical instruments. They are employed in making operative connections between the physical world and the world of numbers, just as for speculative Masons, they make connections between the world of moral ideals and our social behavior. So it is that we come back to Freemasonry's view of the psyche and its innate awareness that symbolism is the means by which the archetypes hidden within the unconscious can shed more light on our conscious lives. When we begin contemplating the lodge, its stations, officers, furnishings, and tools, as each and all representing universal potentials in our nature, then we begin parting the veils on the archetypes and better grasp their presences in our psyches and how we live. On that note, we now turn our attention to the matters of psychological health and disease. The concept of health in Freemasonry is fairly simple and straightforward, and is repeatedly indicated by our symbols and teachings. We can begin to understand the Masonic concept of health by considering the ideal conditions in a lodge: peace, harmony, and unity. In the Scottish Rite, this ideal is summed up in a single word: equilibrium. Yet, such a condition should not be mistaken as a static balance, for human beings are constantly experiencing change, both within us and around us. Just as establishing and maintaining peace, harmony, and unity in a lodge requires constant attention and effort, so it is in the individual psyche. Our ritual teaches that this work requires three principal supports to the lodge: wisdom, strength, and beauty, and therefore we should apply them for our own internal well-being. Beauty speaks of the proper proportions, gracefulness, and uniqueness that make an edifice or a human being admirable and pleasant to experience. Strength speaks of the durability of something as well as its power to affect other things. Thus, a healthy psyche is both resilient in the face of change and effective in accomplishing beneficial change. Wisdom speaks of the knowledge and skills required to accept and adjust to change in ways that establish and maintain both beauty and strength. If health is Masonically understood as equilibrium, then disease is imbalance or disharmony. Where psychological health is characterized by an inner peace and harmony that is composed of wisdom, strength, and beauty, psychological disease is a disharmony characterized by the inability or failure to accept and adjust to change in ways that establish and maintain both beauty and strength. Healing of any psychological infirmity must therefore knowingly and willingly engage change in just that way. In contemplation of our own psyches and lives, we come to understand how it is that we have been lacking in wisdom, strength, and beauty. We envision what we wish to attain. We appreciate and maximize our natural assets, talents, and potentials. And then we act on clear and reasonable goals and objectives for beneficial change. Our ritual provides a specific vision for developing the desirable conditions of adulthood. In youth, as entered apprentices, we ought industriously to occupy our minds in the attainment of useful knowledge. In manhood, as fellowcrafts, we should apply our knowledge to the discharge of our respective duties to God, our neighbors, and ourselves, so that in old age, as Master Masons, we may enjoy the happy reflections consequent on a well-spent life and die in the hope of a glorious immortality. Clearly, Freemasonry does not assume that the physical aging process itself naturally fulfills the ideals of wisdom, strength, and beauty in a well-balanced psyche. Time alone does not deliver us from the, quote, numerous evils incident to childhood and youth, end quote, so that we can with, quote, health and vigor arrive at the years of manhood, end quote. One of the most significant principles within this teaching is that healthy maturation requires intentional and purposeful effort, first in becoming educated and then in applying our knowledge and skills. With an ongoing commitment to learning and to applying our knowledge, we continually develop into wiser, stronger, and more beautiful human beings who are more at peace and in harmony with the world around us and with ourselves. This Masonic path of developing toward the ideal of a truly adult psyche is communicated in many ways, but perhaps most clearly and specifically by referring to the cardinal and theological virtues: prudence, fortitude, temperance, justice, faith, hope, and charity or love, which are ritually explained in terms of internal thoughts and feelings, as well as external behaviors and relationships with others. Again, it is stressed that knowledge and understanding alone are only the beginning, for we must also employ that knowledge with diligent efforts to accomplish actual development. To engage such work consciously is the very meaning of the word initiation. In Freemasonry, such transformations can occur across the entire range of human experience. They are therefore holistic, with different kinds of initiation involving development of the various dimensions of the psyche in different ways. We will consider these developments under 4 categories of initiation: social, academic, philosophical, and spiritual. Social initiation is the most basic and universal level of initiatory development. It engages the psyche of the individual primarily in the physical and emotional dimensions, though mental faculties are certainly called upon in their support. At the very least, social initiation is the beginning of one's membership in the fraternity. New relationships with new responsibilities are begun, such as keeping the specific points of the obligations, the payment of dues, etc. New voluntary duties to the group may also be accepted, such as the holding of offices, serving on committees, or performing in rituals. Masonic social initiation also includes the goal of development in the individual's moral life. The brunt of our ritual instruction and symbolism directly addresses this point, and almost every Mason should be able to find at least one other to regard as a mentor in moral and social virtues. The lessons and examples one receives in the lodge encourage the social initiate of Freemasonry to have a positive attitude and beneficial impact in all one's relationships outside the lodge. In the context of social initiation, Masonic rituals can also be rites of passage. A rite of passage is a significant developmental event in one's life, a milestone that indicates the individual has passed to a new level of cultural development, such as a first date, high school graduation, or marriage. Masonic ritual becomes a rite of passage when one considers it as a landmark of adulthood, an entry into a circle of admired elders, or deeper participation in the traditions of one's family or community. An academic initiation may also occur. Academic initiation primarily involves the conscious mental dimension, though it will likely include concepts that address the other dimensions of being. Our tradition provides opportunities for such initiation by continually urging us to seek more light beyond the ritual itself. Academic initiation has occurred when the individual is inspired in the following ways. to repeatedly muse upon possible meanings of the elements of ritual, to continually engage in serious study to learn about various aspects of our rituals and about what others have discovered in them, to keep integrating these ideas into an increasingly comprehensive understanding of Freemasonry. Academic initiation reaches beyond the fraternity as one finds great joy in exploring the fantastic wealth of knowledge that humanity has acquired across the eons of history. Such information makes the experience of our present life and times richer and more meaningful. The academic initiate often finds that one or a few closely related fields are of special interest, yet, even in such specialization, one gains a deeper appreciation for the connectedness and interdependence of all fields of knowledge. An academic initiation may also lead to or be part of a truly philosophical initiation. Philosophical initiation has occurred when one's desires and efforts are not simply for the pleasure of gaining more information. The word philosophy is composed of the Greek roots philos for love and sophia for wisdom, and thus it is literally the love of wisdom. A philosophical initiate, therefore, aims at a deeper understanding of oneself and fellow human beings and seeks to transform that understanding into wisdom. Almost anyone will learn and grow from their Masonic experience and thus be psychologically healed and transformed to some extent, even if the experience involves nothing more than social initiation. Yet either because they come into the fraternity seeking deeper work or because their Masonic experiences awaken them to such possibilities, some Masons intentionally engage themselves with Freemasonry for philosophical initiation. Those members consciously seek healing and transformation of their lives and to become instruments of healing and transformation for others. Processes that aid the transformation of the psyche include more than just ritual, social involvement, and academic pursuits. In both spiritual and therapeutic practice, transformation is powerfully facilitated by the internal disciplines of prayer, contemplation or meditation, active imagination, and dream work. It should therefore be no surprise that Masonic ritual explicitly encourages the practice of prayer and contemplation. For example, we are taught to seek the blessings of deity before all great and noble undertakings, and to refer to the volume of sacred law as our rule and guide. If Freemasonry had no concept of spirit as an inseparable dimension of the psyche, then there would be little need for these admonitions. We are also taught that Freemasonry leads the contemplative to view with reverence and admiration the glorious works of creation and inspires him with the most exalted ideas of the perfections of his divine Creator. To open our souls in prayer and in contemplation of Scripture, nature, and God is to acknowledge the limitations of the conscious mind and emotions, and to welcome the possibility of inspiration and perhaps even intervention to ensure that our understandings and labors are in conformity with the designs of the great architect of the universe. In probing those mysteries, yet another sort of initiation and transformation may occur: spiritual initiation. Spiritual initiation is an awakening to and contemplation of a mysterious dimension of one's being that transcends yet unifies the physical, emotional, and intellectual dimensions into a whole psyche. The developments induced through spiritual initiation are always about the individual becoming illuminated as a more inspired, loving, and effective instrument of the divine, and thus a better servant of humanity. In short, spiritual initiation is the internal shift that has led some individuals to become humanity's greatest theologians, prophets, mystics, and saints. The spiritual initiate does not make Freemasonry a religion. Rather, Freemasonry becomes an intentional part of one's spiritual life and stirs the psyche to plumb the depths of the religion one considers one's own, while also remaining open to the wisdom of others. So it is that a spiritual initiate is motivated not only to immerse oneself in the symbolism of Freemasonry, but also willingly draws its symbols deep within the psyche for contemplation. One concentrates upon them and welcomes them to serve as archetypal keys to unlocking the mysteries of the unconscious and of the spirit. Because the spiritual dimension of the psyche unifies the other dimensions, the spiritual initiate is also a social, academic, and philosophical initiate. As a social initiate, one gladly opens the arms of brotherly love from Masons of other faiths. As an academic initiate, one enjoys learning more about the histories, myths, customs, and beliefs of different traditions. In this process, one may come to see how various philosophies and religions express many of the same underlying truths, while also appreciating each one's uniqueness and special value. As a philosophical initiate, one seeks ways that all of this knowledge and understanding can be integrated and applied for the advancement of peace, harmony, and unity within the rich diversity of all God's children. In summary, the spiritual initiate of Freemasonry understands and warmly embraces a duty to all fellow human beings, which is to develop as their spiritual sibling. Having clarified the basic picture of the psyche's structure, dynamics, health, and maturation, we are ready to attend to what our tradition suggests about the psychology of relationships. It is most telling that Freemasonry hardly ever speaks of the internal health and well-being of the individual without simultaneously addressing the individual's relationships with others. Freemasonry undeniably considers the individual and society as interconnected, each affecting the other in numerous ways, for better or worse. To understand the psychology of Freemasonry, we must therefore study the dynamics by which the individual and the fraternity relate to one another, and how that relationship can affect the thinking and emotions within the individual, as well as one's outward behavior. Freemasonry openly declares that its purpose is to have a beneficial effect on the individual. For example, we claim that we are about making ourselves better human beings, learning to improve ourselves in Freemasonry, divesting our minds and consciences of all the vices and superfluities of life, and so on. The primary purpose of Freemasonry is therefore not to grow the fraternity in membership numbers, to provide money or volunteers for philanthropic endeavors, or to build the social prestige of the fraternity. Freemasonry's primary goal is to help its members transform themselves into psychologically healthier human beings and thereby improve their social, moral, and spiritual lives. Such internal work lays the foundation for all the virtues that a Freemason should bring to his relationships in the external world. Said another way, we should not merely put on the moral and social virtues of Freemasonry like a facade on a weak and empty structure. Rather, we should strive to properly develop our virtues from the inside out, just as the proper construction of a house develops from foundation to frame, then to walls and roof, and finally to its furniture and decorations. As we have already seen, peace, harmony, and unity, and all that produces and maintains those conditions, are taken as the ideals for both the lodge and the individual psyche, and thus they become the ideals for our relationships. Yet we need to examine more closely how these ideals are actually practiced in Masonic relationships. As a graphic representing the field of Masonic relationships, consider these three large overlapping or interlocking circles in a triangular form. All three circles overlap in a small area at the center. One of the circles is labeled with the word membership, another circle with instruction, and the last circle with initiation. The portion of overlap for all three circles is labeled as ritual. Ritual is thus revealed as the hub in Masonic fraternal relationships. Ritual serves as the primary meeting place and central means of communication for these three general and interrelated aspects of the Masonic experience. Without ritual, some aspects of Masonic relationships could be established, but not all and not as well. It is the physical, experiential anchor and place where the other three aspects of the psyche meet. As illustrated by this image, all three areas include more than the events of ritual itself. Each of these three aspects of Masonic relationships has much of its own territory outside of ritual, and they interact with each other outside of ritual. Yet ritual brings all three together in the most powerful way. To gain a deeper appreciation of what these three areas reveal about the psychology of relationships, we shall examine how each is specifically relevant to one of the most intimate and respectful forms of relationships, which is mentoring. The psychological significance of membership is belonging, which addresses our most basic needs as social creatures. Our ritual is the means by which an individual cements a commitment to belong to the fraternity, and it also demonstrates the fraternity's welcoming and recognition of that individual. Much like a marriage ceremony, Masonic ritual provides a framework for entering into mutual obligations. Belonging is established by the members' promises to support each other and to support family members as well. The Masonic experience amplifies this sense of belonging by clearly communicating mutual respect between the individual and the fraternity. The fraternity communicates its respect by maintaining the safety and dignity of the individual, while also providing one with sincere and reverent ceremonies that permit access to its most treasured secrets and benefits. The individual communicates respect by trusting the fraternity and submitting to the same tests, trials, and instructions as did those who came before. If nothing else, this shared experience of ritual provides an instant point of contact and commonality among persons who otherwise might have never come to know and enjoy each other's company. Outside of ritual, members can build on their belonging and respect by coming together for meals, attending to the business of maintaining an organization, and working together on social, academic, and philanthropic projects. In effect, the fraternity forms a kind of extended family, while also teaching that all of humanity should be considered a family, and every individual respected as a child of God. In mentoring, the area of membership corresponds most directly to the role of companion. At the most basic level, a companion is someone who is simply present, and thus can be anyone with whom we share an experience. Good companions know when and how to listen, and find ways to personally relate to the experiences of others. Strong companions also share a sense of loyalty and commitment, a bond of trust, and a willingness to take on some portion of each other's burdens. Just as Masonic tradition ensures the immediate presence of a companion in almost every moment of ritual, so the fraternity ensures that every member has the opportunity to experience companionship outside of ritual. The mere presence of a genuinely engaged companion gives us strength, courage, and hope, conditions that Freemasonry urges us to foster in our relationships with all human beings. It is through instruction that Freemasonry directly addresses our higher emotional and intellectual needs, and the psychological processes of symbolism are intentionally engaged. The experience of ritual provides instruction in the images, allegories, and myths that touch upon the archetypes of the unconscious and communicate our shared values, principles, and ideals. All cooperative relationships must have shared values, principles, and ideals, for without them, there is no cohesion, group identity, or sense of direction and purpose. Without these points of connection, there is little real meaning in belonging. And therefore, ritual provides us with a reverent and dynamic means to help establish the meaning of our relationships. The general purposes of instruction are to impart information and to encourage the search for knowledge and the plumbing of its depths, all with the aim of making life healthier, richer, and more pleasant for others as well as oneself. The teacher is therefore the mentoring role that corresponds to instruction. The teacher can be anyone who communicates information about Freemasonry, but it is especially the teacher's role to help one understand the information. Little needs to be said about the high priority Freemasonry places on education in our lodges and temples, as well as in society. By including opportunities to experience truly caring teachers and to develop one's own ability to teach, the Masonic experience provides a training ground that prepares its members for teaching roles in society, such as parenting, supervising at work, or simply in helping friends and family learn from the experiences of everyday life. So, what does the experience of Freemasonry reveal about how to teach effectively? Much of the power of ritual instruction lies in the fact that it is holistic, addressing and involving the whole range of human experience and expression, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Because it is holistic, it is experiential, which means that its instructions are not merely provided as written or spoken information. Instruction is also experienced through visual signs and emblems, seeing and feeling physical objects, going through various bodily motions and movements about the room, hearing sounds such as gavel raps and music, playing the roles of different characters in the stories of our tradition, sensing and reflecting the attitudes and emotions of the others involved, and participating in moments of silence and prayer. Because ritual instruction is holistic and experiential, the mind is automatically engaged in forming concrete memories in connection with the images, attitudes, and ideas being communicated, which in turn make the recall of that information easier and more complete. Because it is holistic, experiential, and symbolic, it taps the unconscious mind more powerfully, which in turn urges the conscious mind to find instruction outside the ritual from Freemasons and other resources, and to speculate and discover meanings that are beyond literal and even moral interpretations. Finally, ritual instruction demonstrates respect for its aims by maintaining traditional forms with artistic beauty and spiritual reverence. In this way, we not only instruct the individual in specific lessons about moral and social virtues, but also simultaneously emphasize their intrinsic importance and value. In our lives beyond the ritual, we do well to give similar respect to anything of great significance that is being communicated to or by us. To carry these principles of instruction into our broader lives is to live as if life itself is a kind of ritual in which everything has the potential to communicate something of deep significance. The initiatory aspect of our ritual separates Freemasonry from many other fraternal or social organizations. This distinction arises because Masonic ritual is more than induction into a group and instruction in its aims. As we have seen, Masonic initiations are turning points, at least symbolically, in the psychological development of a Mason's life. The entered apprentice as the ambitious youth, the fellowcraft as the competent adult, and the master mason as the wise elder. Corresponding to transformations in different dimensions of the psyche, we have also seen different categories of initiation: social, academic, philosophical, and spiritual. Thus, initiation is the aspect of Masonic relationships that is about facilitating and celebrating the development and transformation of others. With regard to mentoring, this area obviously relates most clearly to the role of the initiator, ritually illustrated by the Master of the Lodge. The Master facilitates the transition and marks the progress of the individual Freemason entering new phases of development. Outside of ritual, an initiator is typically an elder who has already successfully passed through the developmental transformations, being approached by a less experienced person. An initiator is therefore a role model or exemplar who is legitimately entitled to challenge and welcome others into a specific social, psychological, or spiritual domain. Accepting the duty of being an authentic initiator means understanding that others, and especially those with less experience, will reflect our actions and attitudes to some extent. And so we willingly bear the responsibility to lead by example. Just as one cannot be a legitimate initiator by pretending to some level of mastery, the way to genuine development and transformation cannot be opened for another by fostering an illusion of his progress. The Master of the Lodge presents the candidate with tests and trials that force a demonstration of actual readiness and commitment to advance. Likewise, we function as initiators outside the Lodge by upholding the prerequisites and accomplishments necessary for recognition as a peer or colleague in a given domain. Such practices are also important in our relationships because they help ensure mutual respect among persons of similar values and goals, as well as excellence and collective progress within a specific field of interest. For example, without appropriate scientific and professional standards, consider how little social prestige, quality in practice, or progress in learning there would be for the fields of architecture or medicine. Families, neighborhoods, and even nations have similar needs for standards and initiators who uphold them. In conclusion, there can be no doubt that a comprehensive and functional psychology is inherent to Freemasonry. We have seen that our tradition provides us with profound clues and useful information about the structure, dynamics, and health of the psyche, as well as guidelines for maturation and development. This led us to carefully examine the relationship between Freemasonry and the individual Freemason as it is facilitated through ritual, which brings together the fraternity's three essential aspects of membership, instruction, and initiation, and thus also engages every aspect of the human psyche. All of this has been to expand upon the realization that Freemasonry's greatest purpose is to assist us in transforming our psyches and relationships into wiser, stronger, and more beautiful reflections of the great architect's designs for the human soul and society. Finally, if you found these ideas stimulating and you are interested in their further application, then consider acquiring my second book, The Contemplative Lodge, published in 2021. In that book, I use the same model of the psyche and Masonic relationships to describe what contemplative leadership is and how it works. Thank you for joining me in this examination of the psychology of Freemasonry. I wish you more wisdom, strength, and beauty.